Have you ever looked at someone from your past and felt a wave of smug satisfaction believing you'd won? For Isabella, seeing her ex-husband Leo after 5 years was that moment. While she dripped in designer labels, he drove a car that belonged in a junkyard. She judged him, pitied him, and even laughed at him, confident she had chosen the better life, the wealthier life. But what she didn't know was that while she was busy looking down on his old Subaru, he was preparing to look down on the world from 40,000 feet. This isn't just a story about money, it's about the staggering difference between looking rich and being truly wealthy, and the day a woman's perfectly curated world came crashing down when she discovered the man she abandoned was not just successful, he was untouchable. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a bill for her quarterly couture subscription and a catalogue from Sotheby's. It was thick, cream-coloured cardstock, the kind of paper that cost more per sheet than most people spent on a week's groceries. The calligraphy, a swirl of gold ink, announced the union of Chloe Whitaker and David Vance. Isabella traced the elegant script with a perfectly manicured nail, a shade of crimson called Bourgeois Bordeaux. A wedding in Aspen in 3 weeks. A faint metallic taste of anxiety coated her tongue. Chloe and David were relics from a past life, her life with Leo. They were couple friends, the ones who had witnessed the slow, painful erosion of her first marriage. Seeing them again meant seeing him. "What's that darling?" Gregory asked, striding into their cavernous living room. He was a man sculpted by expensive tailoring and an even more expensive personal trainer. His voice, perpetually loud, as if to fill any room he entered, with his presence boomed off the minimalist white walls and Italian marble floors. He adjusted the Patek Philippe on his wrist, a casual movement designed to draw attention to its 5-figure price tag. "An invitation," Isabella said, holding it up. "Chloe and David are getting married. In Aspen." Gregory peered at it, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "Whitaker and Vance. Aren't they those artsy friends of your ex, the sculptor and the poet or whatever? She's a gallery owner and he's a novelist." Isabella corrected the words, automatic. "And yes, they were our friends. Well, I suppose we have to go. Aspen's a bore in the fall, but it would be rude not to show our faces." Gregory declared, already pulling out his phone, his thumb swiping decisively. "I'll have my assistant book the Starlight Ridge. Penthouse suite, of course. We'll fly private naturally. No point in rubbing shoulders with the common folk at Denver International." Isabella felt a familiar wave of relief wash over her. This was her life now, a world where problems were solved with a phone call and a limitless credit card. A world of penthouse suites, private jets, and the comforting insulation of extreme wealth. It was the world she had always craved, the one she had left Leo to find. Their divorce had been acrimonious, a battlefield of her ambition against his contentment. Leo, with his brilliant mind and his maddening lack of drive, had been happy in their small, charming bungalow, tinkering with circuit boards and processors in the garage. He spoke of changing the world and revolutionary tech, but all Isabella saw were mounting bills and a husband who wore the same worn-out jeans for days on end. She wanted galas. He wanted late nights in his workshop. She wanted a summer home in the Hamptons. He wanted to invest in a new oscilloscope. "I can't live on potential, Leo," she had screamed during their final explosive fight. "Potential doesn't pay for a mortgage. It doesn't buy a table at Per Se. I'm drowning here waiting for a breakthrough that's never going to come." His quiet response had infuriated her more than any shout could have. "The work is the reward, Izzy. I thought you understood that." But she hadn't. She had understood that her youth was fading and her dreams of a certain lifestyle were slipping through her fingers. When she met Gregory, a real estate mogul, who dripped brand names and talked in terms of quarterly earnings and asset portfolios, it was like breathing oxygen after holding her breath for years. He was tangible success. He was the scoreboard, and he was winning. Leaving Leo had been a calculated business decision. She had traded the uncertain stock of a brilliant but unproven inventor for the blue-chip security of established wealth. And in the 5 years since, every day had felt like a vindication of that choice. Her life with Gregory was a meticulously curated Instagram feed of luxury. Their apartment overlooked Central Park. Their closets were filled with runway fashion, and their vacations were a blur of five-star resorts and Michelin-starred restaurants. Yet the thought of seeing Leo again stirred something unsettling within her. Not regret, she told herself firmly. It was more like a morbid curiosity. What had become of him? The last she'd heard through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances was that he had moved out of the city, somewhere quiet, to focus on his work. She pictured him in a cramped apartment, probably still wearing those same old jeans, surrounded by soldering irons and dusty prototypes. A pang of something she refused to name, pity, perhaps pricked at her. "Is Leo going to be there?" Gregory asked, looking up from his phone. His tone was laced with a cruel sort of amusement. "He's David's best man," Isabella said, her voice tight. "Oh, this will be rich." Gregory chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that held no real warmth. "A little reunion. It will be good for him to see you. See how well you're doing. Maybe it will motivate him to finally get a real job." Isabella managed a thin smile. Gregory loved the story of her ex-husband. It was a perfect foil for his own success, a narrative he deployed at dinner parties to highlight his own provider status. He was the hero who had rescued her from a life of mediocrity. As she looked around her perfect living room at the abstract art that cost more than her parents' house and the view that spanned half of Manhattan, she hardened her heart. Gregory was right. This trip to Aspen wouldn't be a reunion. It would be a victory lap. It was a chance to finally definitively close that chapter of her life and show not just Leo, but all their old friends that she had made the right choice. She would be gracious, of course. She would offer a sympathetic smile and ask him how he was managing. But underneath it all, her presence alone would be a statement. "Look at what you lost. Look at what I gained." She began to mentally plan her wardrobe for the weekend. The Chanel ski suit, the Hermes snow boots, the custom-made Oscar de la Renta gown for the wedding itself, and jewelry, lots of jewelry. The 10-carat diamond ring Gregory had given her would be the centerpiece, a glittering testament to her upgrade. Every detail would be a weapon, every accessory a carefully aimed barb. She wasn't just attending a wedding, she was making a presentation on the unparalleled success of her life, and she would not abide a single flaw. The journey to Aspen was an exercise in performative wealth, orchestrated by Gregory, with the subtlety of a fireworks display. Their private jet, a chartered Learjet 75, was stocked with champagne that cost $800 a bottle, and a platter of sushi flown in that morning from Tokyo. Gregory made sure to loudly complain that his preferred jet, the Gulfstream G550, was unavailable. A complaint clearly intended for the two-person flight crew. Isabella played her part, sipping the champagne and laughing at his jokes, all while a knot of nervous energy tightened in her stomach. She scrolled through photos of the Starlight Ridge Resort on her phone. It was the pinnacle of mountain luxury, a sprawling complex of stone and timber that clung to the side of a cliff, offering panoramic views of the snow-dusted peaks. The penthouse suite Gregory had booked was larger than the house she and Leo had once shared. It featured a private terrace with a hot tub, a personal butler, and floor-to-ceiling windows that made the mountains feel like they were part of the decor. "Look at that," Gregory said, leaning over her shoulder, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "That's how you do Aspen. None of that rustic cabin nonsense. If you're going to be in the mountains, you should be able to look down on them." His words resonated with her, looking down. That was the goal, wasn't it? Upon landing at Aspen-Pitkin County Airport, a private airfield catering almost exclusively to the ultra-wealthy, a prearranged black Cadillac Escalade was waiting on the tarmac. The driver, a stoic man in a black suit, loaded their mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage, while Gregory tipped him with $100 bill, a gesture both generous and ostentatious. The drive to the resort was breathtaking, but Isabella barely noticed the golden aspen trees or the crisp, clean air. She was rehearsing. She practiced her smile in the reflection of the tinted window, a smile that was warm but distant, conveying success without arrogance. She practiced the lines she would use when she saw Leo. Leo, it's been so long. You look, well. The slight pause, the careful choice of the word well instead of great or amazing, was crucial. It was a word that offered politeness without praise. The Starlight Ridge was even more opulent in person. A massive stone fireplace dominated the lobby, and the air was scented with pine and money. They were greeted by the general manager himself, a testament to Gregory's status. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Vance, welcome back to Starlight Ridge. The Aspen Suite is prepared for you. Your personal butler, James, is waiting to assist with your luggage and any immediate needs," the manager said with a deferential bow. As they were escorted to the private elevator, Isabella felt the last of her anxiety melt away, replaced by a surge of confidence. Here, in this temple of wealth, she was a goddess. The world she had chosen was solid, real, and utterly unshakable. How could Leo, with his quiet life and his forgotten projects, possibly compare? They settled into the suite, and while Gregory was on the phone, barking orders at his subordinate back in New York, Isabella stepped out onto the private terrace. The air was thin and cold, but it felt electric. She looked out over the valley, the town of Aspen, twinkling below like a scattered handful of diamonds. This was her view. This was her life. The welcome reception was being held that evening in the hotel's fireside lounge. Isabella took her time getting ready, selecting a form-fitting cashmere dress by the row and pairing it with minimalist but brutally expensive jewelry from Buccellati. When she met Gregory by the elevator, he gave her an appreciative once-over. "Stunning, darling," he said, kissing her cheek. "You look like $1 billion. Let's go make your ex-husband regret every decision he's ever made." The lounge was already buzzing with guests. Familiar faces from her past life turned as they entered, their eyes widening almost imperceptibly. She saw the recognition, the quick appraisal of her dress, her ring, her companion. She was no longer just Izzy Leo's quiet, ambitious wife. She was Isabella Vance, Gregory Sterling's fiancée, a woman who had clearly, unequivocally traded up. She mingled, accepting compliments and air kisses, skillfully navigating conversations that danced around the elephant in the room, her very public divorce and dramatic lifestyle change. Chloe, the bride-to-be, rushed over and enveloped her in a genuine hug. "Izzy, you look incredible. I'm so happy you could make it," Chloe said, her eyes sparkling. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Isabella replied, her rehearsed smile clicking into place. "You and David deserve all the happiness." Over Chloe's shoulder, she scanned the room. And then she saw him. He was standing by the large stone fireplace, talking to David. He looked the same, and yet different. He was still lean, but the subtle hint of stress that had perpetually furrowed his brow was gone. His hair was a little shorter, and he was wearing a simple, well-tailored dark grey sweater and dark jeans. No flashy watch, no designer labels she could identify. He looked healthy, rested, and maddeningly calm. A glass of what looked like club soda was in his hand. Her heart gave a strange, unwelcome lurch. For a moment she was transported back in time to a dozen other parties, just like this one, where he would stand quietly by the edge of the room, observing a thoughtful look on his face. He never needed to be the center of attention, a trait that had once endeared her and later exasperated her. Gregory, however, had no such compunctions. He spotted Leo at the same moment she did. Well, he said, his voice a low growl of amusement next to her ear. "There he is, the mad scientist in his natural habitat. Let's go say hello, shall we? Before she could protest, Gregory was steering her across the room, his hand possessively on the small of her back. The path parted before them, conversations quieting as people turned to watch the impending collision. Isabella's face felt hot, her perfectly applied composure threatening to crack. David saw them approaching and gave Leo a subtle nudge. Leo turned, and his eyes, a deep, intelligent blue she had once known better than her own, met hers. There was no shock in them, no anger, no sadness, just a quiet, unnerving flicker of recognition. The moment had arrived. The stage was set. And as she drew closer, Isabella prepared to deliver her lines, ready to cement her victory in the silent, undeclared war she had been waging for the past 5 years. The next day was reserved for guest activities before the evening rehearsal dinner. Gregory had arranged for a private ski instructor, a former Olympian, while Isabella opted for a spa treatment that involved a 24-carat gold facial. Everything was designed for maximum impact and comfort. As she lay on the heated massage table, the esthetician gently applying flakes of gold to her skin, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what life was supposed to feel like. Later, wrapped in a plush white robe, she sat in the spa's relaxation lounge, sipping cucumber-infused water and gazing out at the ski slopes. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Chloe, a group text to the bridal party, and close friends. Change of plans for lunch. Instead of the terrace grill, meet us at Pine Creek Cookhouse. It's a bit of a drive, but the views are worth it. See you all at 1 p.m. Isabella frowned slightly. Pine Creek Cookhouse was a legendary Aspen establishment, but it was remote, located deep in the Castle Creek Valley. The hotel's concierge had mentioned that the final stretch of the road could be rugged. She found Gregory in their suite on a conference call, pacing and gesticulating wildly. He held up a finger, signaling for her to wait. After another 5 minutes of berating someone named Peterson for a missed deadline, he finally hung up. "What is it?" He snapped his good mood from the ski slopes, having evidently evaporated. Chloe changed the lunch plans. "We're going to some place called Pine Creek Cookhouse." "It's a bit of a drive," she explained. Gregory scoffed. "Fine, whatever. Tell the valet to have the Escalade ready. And tell them to make sure it has the all-weather tires. I'm not getting stuck in the mud for some overpriced elk burger." An hour later, they were sweeping through the winding mountain roads in the climate-controlled comfort of the massive SUV. Gregory drove one hand on the wheel, the other holding his phone to his ear as he closed a deal. Isabella watched the stunning scenery pass by the golden aspen groves, giving way to darker pines. The road narrowed and grew rougher the smooth pavement, turning to graded dirt. "Can you believe this?" Gregory muttered, ending his call. "Making us drive on a glorified tractor path. This better be the best lunch of my life." They finally pulled into a clearing that served as a parking lot. It was packed with luxury vehicles, Range Rovers, Porsche Cayennes, a few G-Wagons, and then, nestled between a brand new Mercedes and a gleaming BMW X7, was a car so out of place it was almost comical. It was a Subaru Outback, at least 20 years old. The forest green paint was faded and scratched with a noticeable dent in the rear bumper. A layer of dust and mud coated its lower half, suggesting it had seen many roads rougher than this one. It was the kind of car a college student drove, or a ski bum who lived out of his vehicle. Isabella stared at it, a slow-motion car crash of recognition happening in her mind. She knew that dent. She had been there when it happened, a runaway shopping cart in a Trader Joe's parking lot a decade ago. She remembered the specific shade of green chosen by Leo because it blended in with nature. And then the driver's side door opened, and Leo unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was wearing the same sweater from the night before, and he stretched his back as if he'd been sitting for a while. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. A tidal wave of emotions washed over her shock, embarrassment, and a sharp, cruel spike of vindication. This was it, the ultimate proof. 5 years later, and he was still driving the same pathetic beat-up car. All his talk of breakthroughs and innovation had led to this, a 2-decade-old station wagon that was probably worth less than the tires on Gregory's Escalade. Gregory followed her gaze and let out a short barking laugh. "You have got to be kidding me. Is that him? Is that his car?" He didn't wait for an answer. He put the Escalade in park, cutting off a sleek Audi trying to find a spot, and strode towards Leo, a predator spotting wounded prey. Isabella, mortified, but also morbidly compelled to watch, followed in his wake. "Leo." My man Gregory boomed, clapping Leo on the shoulder, with enough force to make him rock on his heels. "I almost didn't recognize you without a cloud of smoke coming from your engine." Leo looked from Gregory's smirking face to Isabella's carefully neutral one. He didn't seem flustered or embarrassed. He simply closed his car door with a familiar, dull thud. "Gregory, Isabella, good to see you made it." "We made it all right," Gregory said, gesturing back to his own vehicle. "In a car built this century." "Seriously, what is this thing? A family heirloom? Did you drive it all the way from wherever it is you live now?" "It gets me where I need to go," Leo said calmly, his eyes unreadable. This was her moment, the one she had been subconsciously preparing for. Her victory lap. All the pity and superiority she felt coalesced into a single cutting remark. She let a small tinkling laugh escape her lips, a sound she had perfected for just such occasions. "Oh, Leo, don't be silly." She stepped forward, reaching out to pat the dusty hood of the Subaru as if it were a stray dog. "It's charming, very rustic. It's good to see you're still so committed to nostalgia." The words hung in the crisp mountain air, dripping with condescension. She looked him directly in the eye, her smile unwavering, wanting him to see the chasm that now existed between them. His life was this dusty, dented car. Hers was the Patek on her fiancé's wrist and the diamond on her finger. Leo's expression didn't change. He looked at her, then at Gregory, then back at his old car. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not anger, not shame, but something she couldn't quite decipher. It almost looked like patience. "Nostalgia's part of it," he said, his voice even. "It reminds me of where I came from, helps me appreciate where I'm going." Gregory guffawed. "And where exactly are you going in this thing, the scrap heap?" "Come on, darling," he said, looping his arm through Isabella's. "Let's go get a drink. I feel like I need to wash the sight of this poverty wagon away." He led her towards the restaurant, leaving Leo standing alone in the parking lot next to his old green car. As they walked away, Isabella couldn't resist a glance back over her shoulder. Leo was watching them go, his hands in his pockets. He wasn't glaring or looking defeated. He just watched, a silent observer to her triumph. She felt a surge of satisfaction, so potent, it was almost dizzying. It was done. She had seen the reality of his life, and it was even more modest than she had imagined. The last lingering ghost of her past had been exorcised. There was no doubt left, no what-ifs. She had won. She had chosen correctly. And as she stepped into the warm, inviting ambience of the restaurant, she felt lighter than she had in years, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath her feet was about to crumble. The rehearsal dinner that evening was an extravagant affair held in a private dining room at the hotel, complete with ice sculptures and a string quartet. Isabella was in her element, floating from group to group, a champagne flute permanently in her hand. The story of Leo's car had already made the rounds, courtesy of Gregory, who recounted it with theatrical flair to anyone who would listen. It became the evening's running joke. Can you imagine one of her old friends, a woman named Sarah, whispered to her by the Rawber? "I honestly feel bad for him. He's such a nice guy, but he just never got his act together. Some people just aren't ambitious," Isabella replied with a delicate shrug, spearing an oyster. "It's a shame, but what can you do?" She delivered the line with a practiced air of sympathy, but inside she was preening. Every expression of pity for Leo was an indirect compliment to her. She felt on top of the world. Yet, as the evening wore on, tiny discordant notes began to disrupt her perfect symphony of success. It started with an overheard snippet of conversation. She was passing a group of David's friends, men she vaguely recognized from the tech and venture capital world. "He flew in yesterday," one man was saying. "Kept it quiet. Said he wanted to avoid any fuss." "Typical Leo," another replied, laughing. "The man could buy the entire state of Wyoming, and he'd still probably show up in a rental Toyota." Isabella paused, her champagne flute halfway to her lips. "Flew in." She had assumed he drove from whatever backwater town he lived in. And the comment about buying Wyoming, it had to be a joke, a gross exaggeration. She dismissed it and moved on. Later, she saw David cornering Leo near the terrace doors. They were speaking in low, intense tones. David was gesturing emphatically, looking slightly stressed, while Leo just listened, nodding occasionally. It seemed more serious than a simple catch-up between old friends. But the most significant crack in her certainty appeared in the form of a man she had never seen before. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair and an impeccably tailored tweed jacket that spoke of old English money, not flashy American wealth. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority that made people unconsciously straighten their posture when he passed. He approached Leo, who was now standing alone looking out at the mountains. "Leonard," the man said, his voice a crisp British baritone. "A word, if I may." Isabella, standing nearby, pretending to admire a floral arrangement, strained to listen. Alistair Leo greeted him, a small, genuine smile finally appearing on his face. "I'm glad you could make it. I hope the flight wasn't too troublesome." "Not at all. The G700 is a remarkable machine. A testament to your team's work, my boy." "Truly revolutionary," the man named Alistair replied, clapping Leo warmly on the back. "G700." The name meant nothing to Isabella, but the tone of reverence in the older man's voice was unmistakable. "The board is ecstatic." "Of course," Alistair continued, his voice dropping slightly, but Isabella's hearing was now laser-focused. "The final valuation came in this morning, north of 50 billion. The deal with the Department of Defense is locked. Etherion Dynamics is officially a titan. 50 billion, the number was so large, it seemed unreal, like something from a movie. Etherion Dynamics. What was that? It sounded like one of the silly names Leo used to invent for his garage projects. It couldn't be real. It had to be a misunderstanding. Leo just nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's good news, Alistair. But we're just getting started. The real work begins now." "Always humble," Alistair chuckled. "It's why we backed you. Now about the Tokyo expansion." Their conversation shifted to logistics and international markets, the words flying over Isabella's head. But the number stuck in her brain, an insistent screaming alarm. 50 billion. She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. She looked over at Leo, really looked at him, at the calm confidence in his posture, the easy way he conversed with this powerful-looking man, the complete and utter lack of concern he had shown about her, about Gregory, about the pathetic old car. It hadn't been the resignation of a defeated man. It had been the indifference of a man playing a completely different game on a level she couldn't even comprehend. "There you are," Gregory's voice slurred beside her. He had been indulging heavily in the open bar. "I've been telling everyone the story about the Subaru. It's a hit. People are calling him Lada Leo." He roared with laughter, drawing a few uncomfortable glances. Suddenly, Gregory's bragging his flashy watch, his loud pronouncements of wealth, it all seemed cheap. It was performative and insecure. He was a man desperate to prove his worth. Leo, on the other hand, seemed to have no need for proof at all. Isabella felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She looked at her fiancé, his face flushed with alcohol and self-satisfaction, and then back at her ex-husband, who was locked in a quiet, world-changing conversation. For the first time in 5 years, a terrifying thought wormed its way into her mind. What if I didn't just leave him? What if I left him right before the breakthrough? He always promised. She pushed the thought away. It was impossible. It was a joke, a misunderstanding. Leo was a tinkerer, a dreamer. not a Titan. He drove a 20-year-old Subaru, for God's sake. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and as she watched Alistair and Leo shake hands, a deal of unimaginable scale seemingly struck between them, she realized the whispers she had been hearing weren't just on the wind. They were the heralds of a hurricane, and it was heading directly for her. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and impossibly clear. The sky was a brilliant, sharp blue, and the sunlight made the remaining dusting of snow on the peaks glitter. The ceremony, Isabella knew from the invitation, was at a surprise location, with transportation departing from the hotel at 10 a.m. Isabella chose her outfit with military precision. A sophisticated Dior day dress in winter white, a sable-trimmed coat, and boots that had never touched actual snow. She was a vision of curated elegance. Gregory was nursing a hangover, grumbling about the early start. A surprise location. "What's wrong with the hotel's ballroom?" he groused, fumbling with his cufflinks. "This whole artsy, unpredictable thing is exhausting." Down in the lobby, the wedding guests were gathering a chattering flock of high-end winter fashion. The hotel staff directed them not to a fleet of buses or limousines, but to a series of sleek black Mercedes Sprinter vans. How quaint, Gregory sneered as they boarded. Shared transportation. Isabella settled into the plush leather seat, her mind still replaying the conversation she'd overheard. 50 billion. The number had kept her awake most of the night. It felt like a phantom, a ghost haunting the edges of her perfect reality. She tried to reason it away. Maybe Alistair was an eccentric old man. Maybe it was a different Leo. Maybe she had misheard. The van pulled out of the hotel's grand driveway, and instead of heading up into the mountains or down into the town, it turned towards the airport. A few other guests murmured in confusion. "Are we flying somewhere?" Sarah asked from the seat behind Isabella. "Maybe it's on a nearby ranch, and this is just the fastest way," her husband suggested. But they didn't stop at the main terminal. The van continued on through a security gate and onto the tarmac of the private aviation section. Isabella's heart began to beat a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. In the distance, several private jets sat gleaming in the morning sun, their sleek fuselages reflecting the vast Colorado sky. The van slowed to a stop, as did the others in their convoy. The door slid open, and they were parked directly in front of an aircraft, so large and magnificent it dwarfed everything else on the airfield. It was a Gulfstream G700. Isabella knew the name now, the one Alistair had mentioned. It was a vision of white and silver, with long, elegant wings and two powerful engines mounted on the tail. It was one of the largest, fastest, and most expensive private jets in the world, a flying penthouse for billionaires and heads of state. This wasn't a chartered Learjet for a weekend getaway. This was a symbol of global power. The guests spilled out of the vans, their chatter silenced, replaced by gasps of awe. They stood staring, shielding their eyes against the sun at the incredible machine before them. A red carpet had been rolled out to the aircraft's stairs. "My God," Gregory breathed, his hangover forgotten. "Whose is this? Did David's father rent it for the wedding? This must have cost a fortune." At that moment, Chloe and David emerged from the lead van, both beaming. Chloe, already in her wedding gown, looked ethereal. "Welcome, everyone," David announced, his voice filled with excitement. "We're so glad you could make it. For the ceremony, we wanted to do something a little different, something you'd never forget." Chloe took over, her eyes twinkling. "We're having it at the top of Cathedral Peak, and our very dear friend has graciously offered to fly us all there." She gestured towards the jet. And then, from behind the wing, Leo appeared. He wasn't wearing a pilot's uniform. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that made him look taller and more formidable than she had ever seen him. He walked over to Chloe and David, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. He looked completely at ease, as if standing in front of a $75 million aircraft was the most natural thing in the world. The pieces slammed together in Isabella's mind with the force of a physical blow. The overheard conversation. "He flew in yesterday. The G700. Alistair's reverence. 50 billion. A collective, dawning realization rippled through the crowd of guests. Whispers erupted. Is that Leo's plane? No way. It can't be. David's best man, I thought he was some kind of engineer. Gregory stood frozen beside her, his jaw slack. The smug superior smirk he always wore had vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned, uncomprehending disbelief. No, Gregory whispered, shaking his head. No, that's impossible. The guy in the Subaru. It's a joke. It has to be some kind of elaborate prank. But it wasn't a prank. The flight crew, in crisp uniform, stood at the top of the stairs, smiling professionally. Leo stepped forward and addressed the stunned crowd. Welcome, everyone, he said, his voice calm and steady, easily carrying in the still morning air. There was no trace of arrogance in it, no hint of a gotcha moment. He was simply a host welcoming his guests. The flight to the peak is short, about 15 minutes. Please find a seat and make yourselves comfortable. We'll be taking off shortly. He looked out over the sea of shocked faces, and for a brief, searing moment, his eyes met Isabella's. He held her gaze for just a second. There was no triumph in his eyes. No, I told you so. There was only a profound, quiet sadness. It was the look of a man who knew a truth she was only just beginning to grasp. Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. The solid ground of her carefully constructed life had turned to quicksand. The man she had mocked, the man she had pitied, the man she had laughed at for driving a cheap car, hadn't just become successful. He hadn't just gotten rich. He had ascended to a stratosphere of wealth and influence so far beyond her imagination that it broke her understanding of the world. And as she stood there, paralyzed by the revelation, she understood. The Subaru wasn't a symbol of his failure. It was a symbol of his freedom. He drove it because he didn't need to prove a single thing to anyone, least of all to her. The flight was a surreal dream from which Isabella couldn't wake. The interior of the Gulfstream was less like an airplane and more like a futuristic luxury apartment. Cream-colored leather seats, polished dark wood, and brushed metal accents created an atmosphere of serene, understated opulence. There were distinct living areas, a club section with wide seats and tables, a dining area, and even a private stateroom at the back. The windows were huge oval portals offering godlike views of the jagged peaks below. Isabella and Gregory found seats in a four-person club arrangement sitting opposite Sarah and her husband. No one spoke. The festive wedding chatter had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, reverent silence. Guests touched the soft leather of the seats, ran their hands over the cool wood of the tables, and stared out the windows with wide, disbelieving eyes. Gregory was a statue of fury. His face was pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. He kept muttering under his breath, fragments of sentences. A front. Has to be a front. Shell company. No way. The Subaru. He was a man whose entire identity was built on a linear, easily understood hierarchy of wealth. The brand of your watch, the size of your car, the location of your apartment, these were the metrics by which he measured himself and everyone else. Leo had shattered that hierarchy. He had broken the rules of the game Gregory thought he was winning. As the jet ascended with a powerful, almost silent grace, Alistair, the silver-haired Englishman, came and sat in the empty seat next to Leo, who was near the front with the bride and groom. Their voices were low, but in the quiet cabin, their words carried. The press release is scheduled for Monday morning, Leonard Alistair said. We'll announce the Dodd contract and the updated valuation simultaneously. The Wall Street Journal and Forbes both have exclusives. They're running cover stories. The quiet genius who electrified the world. Isabella felt the words like daggers. The patent for the solid-state battery technology is the real jewel. Of course, Leo replied, his voice calm and technical. Ethereum's core innovation, doubling the energy density while eliminating thermal runaway. It changes everything. electric aviation grid storage, consumer electronics. It all came flooding back to Isabella in a sickening rush. The late nights in the garage, the whiteboards covered in complex chemical equations she never bothered to understand, his excited explanations about energy density and ionic conductivity that she had dismissed as geeky jargon. The time he'd almost set the garage on fire, and she'd screamed at him for being reckless, for playing with toys instead of getting a real job with a 401k. She remembered the exact moment she had left. She had found him in the garage, his face smudged with grease, but his eyes shining with an almost holy light. "Izzy, I think I've done it," he'd whispered, holding up a small silvery polymer square. "I've solved the dendrite problem. This is it. This changes everything." She had looked at the small, unimpressive square, then at his dirty hands, and then around the cluttered, oil-stained garage. And all she had felt was a profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. She didn't want to wait for everything to change. She wanted a new car now. She wanted the life Gregory was offering now. "I'm happy for you, Leo," she had said, her voice flat and cold. "But I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving." She had walked away from him at the very moment of his genesis, at the precipice of a discovery that would, as Alistair had put it, electrify the world. The company he founded, Etherion Dynamics, was now worth $50 billion. Not because he had sold out, not because he had gotten lucky, but because his quiet, obsessive work, the very work she had scorned, had actually truly changed the world. A wave of nausea washed over her. The gold facial, the designer dress, the 10-carat diamond on her finger, it all felt like cheap, gaudy plastic. She had traded a Rembrandt for a poster. She had cashed in her shares in the next Apple for a weekend in the Hamptons. Gregory finally snapped. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, swaying slightly as the jet banked. "This is a joke, right?" he said, his voice too loud in the hushed cabin. He pointed a trembling finger at Leo. "You, how did you pull this off? Who are you fronting for? The cartel, the Chinese. There is no way a garage jockey from nowhere builds this." The cabin went dead silent. Everyone turned to stare. Leo slowly turned in his seat. His face was unreadable. Alistair looked at Gregory with an expression of pure, icy contempt, the kind of look one gives a bug before squashing it. Sir Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I suggest you sit down. You are embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself." Gregory laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "This guy drives a car that's a public health hazard, and I'm embarrassing myself." He turned to Isabella, his eyes wild with desperation. "Tell them, Bella. Tell them what a loser he was. Tell them about his stupid projects and his empty bank account." Isabella couldn't speak. Her throat was closed tight with shame. She just stared at him, this loud, insecure man she had chosen, as he completely unraveled in the face of a reality he couldn't process. Leo finally spoke. "Sit down, Gregory." His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. It was the voice of a man who had moved on so completely that this confrontation was nothing more than a minor, irritating distraction. The quiet command, backed by the silent, collective judgment of everyone in the cabin, finally broke through Gregory's rage. He deflated his shoulders, slumping. He fell back into his seat, a broken man, and stared blankly out the window, finally defeated. Isabella looked away from him, her gaze falling on her own hands, at the massive diamond that now felt like a shackle. She had built her entire world on a foundation of material wealth, believing it was the ultimate measure of a person's worth. And in 15 short minutes, Leo had demolished that world without saying a single word against her. He had simply shown her the truth. The real measure of worth wasn't what you owned, it was what you created. And while she had been busy acquiring things, he had been busy building an empire. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. It took place on a specially constructed platform on a ledge near the summit of Cathedral Peak, with the entire Elk Mountains range serving as the backdrop. The bride and groom said their vows against a panorama of impossible beauty, but Isabella saw none of it. The crisp mountain air felt thin and suffocating. The celebratory champagne tasted like ash in her mouth. She stood slightly apart from the other guests, a ghost at the feast, watching the man she'd left behind serve as the best man at a wedding held in the sky, a wedding made possible by his genius. Gregory was sullen and silent beside her, his humiliation a palpable aura. He had refused to even look at Leo. The power dynamic had been so utterly and completely inverted that he couldn't cope. His world, with its simple material rules, was broken. During the flight back to Aspen, as guests chatted excitedly about the ceremony, Leo moved through the cabin, thanking everyone for coming. He was gracious, humble, and utterly in command of his environment. Eventually, he made his way to her. Gregory pointedly turned and stared out the window. Leo paused by her seat. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet. She finally forced herself to look at him. "Leo, I'm sorry if today was, uncomfortable for you," he said. It was a genuine apology, devoid of any irony. Why, she asked, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. Why the car? Why didn't you say anything? He leaned against the seat opposite hers, his expression thoughtful. "The car was my dad's," he said softly. "He bought it new in 2005. He loved that car. We took it on camping trips, fishing trips. He taught me how to change the oil in it. After he passed, I couldn't get rid of it. Driving it keeps him close. It reminds me that all of this," he gestured vaguely at the luxurious cabin, "isn't the point. It's the result of the work, not the reason for it." His words were a gut punch. She had mocked a memorial. She had laughed at his deepest sentimentality, mistaking it for failure. As for not saying anything, he continued with a small shrug. What was there to say? "Hey, by the way, that project you hated is now a multi-billion-dollar company. That's not me, Izzy. You know that. I never did it for the money or the bragging rights. I did it because I believed in it." He paused, and his eyes softened, with a hint of the old affection she remembered. "I'm not angry at you, you know. You wanted a different life, and you went and got it. I hope it's made you happy. Has it made you happy?" The question echoed in the silent spaces of her heart. She thought of her life with Gregory, a life of endless acquisitions, of keeping up appearances, of a love that felt more like a merger. It was a gilded cage, beautiful from the outside but cold and empty within. She had all the things she thought she wanted, but she felt nothing. She looked at Leo, a man who had stayed true to his passion, who honored his father by driving an old car, who possessed a fortune she couldn't comprehend, but found his joy in the work itself. He had everything, but it was clear that the jet, the money, the acclaim, they were just byproducts. His real wealth was his purpose. "I was wrong," she whispered the confession, so quiet it was almost swallowed by the hum of the engines. "About everything." He gave her a sad, knowing smile. It was a smile of closure, not of reconciliation. "We were just on different paths, Izzy. Mine was just a little longer and more complicated than either of us knew." He nodded once, a final gentle goodbye, and moved on to the next guest. Isabella was left alone with her reflection in the massive oval window. Below the world was a map of mountains and valleys, a world he was now looking down upon. She had spent 5 years gloating over a race she thought she had won, only to discover she had been running in the wrong direction the entire time. The victory she had so desperately craved had turned to dust in her mouth. She had her rich man, her designer clothes, her penthouse views, and in that moment, flying through the sky in her ex-husband's private jet, she had never felt so poor. In the end, Isabella's story serves as a chilling reminder that the brightest glitter often comes from the shallowest gold. She built her life on the shaky foundation of appearances, judging worth by price tags and success by the roar of an engine, only to have her world dismantled by the quiet hum of a jet. She learned the harshest lesson of all, that true wealth isn't worn on your wrist or parked in your driveway. It's forged in passion, purpose, and the quiet, unseen dedication to a dream. Her laughter in that parking lot turned into a silent scream in her soul, an echo of the colossal mistake she made. What do you think? Did Isabella deserve her humbling moment? Or is there a part of you that understands the choices she made? We all know people who chase the shine, but how many of us have ever stopped to wonder what brilliance we might be leaving behind in the shadows? If this story of ambition, regret, and shocking twists resonated with you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that peel back the layers of our modern world.
The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art wasn't just filled with the scent of expensive perfume and blooming orchids. It was thick with the weight of ambition and old money. Tonight at the annual Nightingale Charity Ball, fortunes would be pledged, alliances would be forged, and reputations would be quietly shredded over glasses of vintage champagne. For Genevieve Holloway, it was a battlefield she had once navigated as a general's wife. Tonight she was entering as a ghost. Dressed in a simple, elegant navy silk gown that cost a fraction of the jewels on the woman next to her, she was invisible. And then she saw him. Her ex-husband Jonathan Beaumont, laughing with his new younger wife. The moment his eyes met hers, they didn't hold anger or sadness. They held nothing. A cold, dismissive emptiness that cut deeper than any insult. He turned away, and in that instant Genevieve wasn't just a ghost. She was nothing. Little did he or anyone else in that glittering hall know that the most powerful person in the room wasn't the one on the stage, but the woman everyone had just decided to ignore. The Nightingale Charity Ball was the undisputed pinnacle of New York's philanthropic season. It was a brutal theater of social hierarchy disguised as a fundraiser. To be invited was a statement. To be seen was a victory. To be ignored was a death sentence. Genevieve Holloway felt the chill of that sentence creep into her bones as she clutched the small beaded clutch in her hands. Her ticket hadn't come from a socialite's spare pile or a corporate table filler. She had bought it herself with money earned from her modest job appraising art for a small, independent auction house. It was a defiant act, a quiet declaration to herself that she still existed, that she wouldn't let the divorce erase her from the world she had once inhabited. The world Jonathan had built around her and then summarily torn down. She stood near a marble pillar, the cool stone a comfort against her back. The ballroom was a dizzying kaleidoscope of light and sound. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls of crystal dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The murmur of conversation was a symphony of calculated compliments and veiled barbs. She saw faces she recognized, banking scions, tech moguls, political power brokers, all performing the intricate dance of the elite. And there, in the center of the most vibrant circle, was Jonathan. He was born for rooms like this. Tall, with a smile that could disarm regulators and charm investors, he radiated an effortless confidence that Genevieve now knew was a meticulously crafted facade. At his side, clinging to his arm, was Brittany Davenport. Her dress was a confection of pale pink tulle and diamonds, a stark contrast to Genevieve's understated navy silk. She was 25, a decade younger than Genevieve, with the bright, unlined face of someone who had never known a day of real struggle. As if sensing her gaze, Jonathan looked up. His eyes, the same ones that had once promised her forever, scanned right over her, then did a double take. A flicker of annoyance crossed his perfect features. He leaned down and whispered something to Brittany. Brittany's perfectly glossed lips curled into a smirk. She turned her eyes, sweeping over Genevieve's dress with theatrical disdain. It was a dismissal, so complete, so public, it felt like a slap. They didn't approach her. They didn't need to. The message was sent, and the surrounding socialites received it loud and clear. Genevieve Holloway is no longer one of us. She is an outcast. The temperature around her seemed to drop. A woman who had co-chaired a committee with her just 2 years ago, a Mrs. Lancaster, met her eyes for a brief second before turning sharply to her companion, her laughter a little too loud. A man who had once drunkenly complimented Genevieve's knowledge of Impressionism at one of Jonathan's dinner parties now stared straight through her as he passed. Each averted gaze, each stiff back was a fresh wound. This was Jonathan's power. He didn't need to scream or shout. He could kill you with silence. He had methodically cut her out of their shared world, rebranding their history with him as the charismatic victim, and her as the unstable, ungrateful wife who couldn't keep up. Genevieve took a steadying breath, her fingers tightening on her clutch. She wouldn't run. That's what he wanted. She had come here for a reason, to prove to herself she could stand in the same room as her past and not shatter. She spotted a familiar, kindlier face near the silent auction tables. Dr. Peterson, her old art history professor from Columbia, a man who had always encouraged her academic passions. He was the one who had written her a letter of recommendation for her current job. Seeing him was a small anchor in this hostile sea. She made her way towards him, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time that evening. "Dr. Peterson." The elderly man turned his eyes, lighting up in recognition. "Genevieve." "My dear, what a pleasant surprise. I haven't seen you since—" He trailed off, the unspoken divorce hanging in the air. "It's been a while," she said warmly. "It's so good to see you." "And you," he said, though his eyes darted nervously over her shoulder towards Jonathan's glittering circle. He was standing with the museum's acquisitions director, a notoriously snobbish man named Gregory Finch. "I was just admiring the lots they have for auction." Genevieve began, trying to steer the conversation to safe ground. "The Degas sketches—" Before she could finish, Gregory Finch's wife, a woman draped in emeralds, drifted over. "Robert," she said, completely ignoring Genevieve and taking Dr. Peterson by the arm. "Gregory wants your opinion on the new security measures for the East Wing. We simply must pull you away." Dr. Peterson shot Genevieve an apologetic look, a flash of pity in his eyes that was almost worse than the open contempt. "Forgive me, Genevieve." He was absorbed into the group, which immediately closed ranks, turning their backs to her. She was alone again, the snub even more painful for its proximity to a moment of kindness. The message was clear. Any association with her was a liability. She was radioactive. A ghost at the feast, a reminder of a story the victors had already rewritten. She felt a familiar crushing weight on her chest, the same weight she'd felt for the last 5 years of her marriage. She retreated to the edge of the room, finding a small, unoccupied alcove behind a large floral arrangement. From here she could watch without being seen, a spectator to her own social execution. Watching Jonathan hold court, it was hard to remember the man she had first met. He wasn't a Beaumont of the Boston Beaumonts then. He was just Jonathan, a fiercely ambitious junior analyst at a rival investment bank. They'd met at a dreary industry conference in Chicago. He was funny, laser-focused on her, and made her feel like the most interesting person in the world. He was captivated by her passion for art history, a field so different from his world of numbers and risk. "You see stories in paintings," he'd told her over dinner, his eyes alight with admiration. "I just see assets. Teach me how to see what you see." And she did. She took him to museums, explained the nuances of chiaroscuro in a Caravaggio, the raw emotion in a Rothko. He seemed to drink it in. He encouraged her to pursue her master's degree at Columbia, boasting to his friends about his brilliant, cultured girlfriend. She believed he valued her intellect, her unique perspective. She was wrong. He was just valuing a potential asset. The change was subtle at first, beginning after they got married, and his career began to skyrocket. Her expertise, once a source of fascination, became a cute hobby. "You don't really need to work, darling," he said one evening shortly after his first big promotion. He had just bought them a sprawling Park Avenue apartment. "Your job is to make this place a home, to host the right people. That's a full-time job. It's more important for my career than the few thousand you make cataloging old paintings." She resisted at first, but he was persuasive. He framed it as a partnership. His success would be their success. Reluctantly, she left her junior position at the Met. Her days, once filled with research and history, were now filled with selecting caterers, approving floral arrangements, and remembering which CEO's wife was allergic to shellfish. She was good at it. She had a natural grace and a genuine interest in people that made their parties legendary. She was the perfect corporate wife, and she was miserable. Her world began to shrink. The money was his. She had an allowance deposited into a joint account he monitored. Once she spent $2,000 on a rare first edition book on Florentine art without consulting him. The ensuing argument wasn't a shouting match. It was worse. It was a cold, quiet lecture in his study where he calmly explained the concept of unapproved expenditures, as if she were a wayward employee. "Jen, this isn't about the money," he said, his voice maddeningly patient. "It's about respect for our financial goals. This book doesn't contribute to the Beaumont brand." The Beaumont brand became his mantra. It dictated the clothes she wore, classic, expensive, not too flashy, the friends she kept only those who could be strategic assets, and the opinions she expressed always aligned with his. He slowly, skillfully isolated her from her old university friends, calling them academically charming but commercially irrelevant. The final, deepest cut was his mockery of her passion. He started a small art collection guided by her recommendations. She poured her heart into it, finding promising young artists and undervalued historical pieces. The collection grew in value, and he took all the credit. At parties, he would stand in front of a painting she had spent weeks researching and pontificate on its merits using the very words she had used to explain it to him. If she tried to add a detail, he'd cut her off with a patronizing smile. "Let's not bore our guests with the dusty details, darling." She had become another one of his assets, a beautiful, well-educated accessory locked in a gilded cage. The divorce was brutal. He hired a team of ruthless lawyers who painted her as a gold digger. Since most of their assets were in his name, and the prenuptial agreement she'd foolishly signed was ironclad, she walked away with next to nothing. He kept the apartment, the art collection she had built, the friends, the life. She was left with a small settlement that barely covered the deposit on a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, and the crushing weight of her own invisibility. The first few months were a blur of tears and cheap wine. But slowly something deep inside her, the part of her that fell in love with art, that loved the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, began to stir. She took the job at the small auction house Windsor and Finch. It was a step down from the Met, but it was hers. She found joy again in the quiet, dusty work of authenticating a piece, of tracing its provenance through history. She was rebuilding her life piece by painful piece. Coming to the ball was supposed to be the final piece, a way to face the past and prove that she had survived it. But as she stood in her lonely alcove, the familiar feelings of worthlessness he had so expertly cultivated threatened to overwhelm her. He hadn't just divorced her, he had tried to unmake her. And as she watched him charm the room, she had to admit he had almost succeeded. From her hiding spot, the ballroom was a stage, and she was watching a play in which she had no part. The orchestra swelled, playing a generic, pleasant melody that served as a soundtrack for networking. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved like phantoms through the crowd, their silver trays laden with champagne flutes and delicate canapes. Genevieve's gaze kept returning to Jonathan. He was in his element, moving from group to group, a handshake here, a meaningful laugh there. He was speaking with Walter Cunningham, a notoriously ruthless private equity titan. Jonathan's company, Beaumont Capital, had been the subject of some unflattering rumors in the financial press lately, over-leveraged, a few bad bets on tech startups. She knew his tells. The way he tilted his head, the slightly too wide smile. He was hunting tonight. He needed an infusion of cash, a powerful new partner to quell the rumors. This ball wasn't just a social event for him. It was a lifeline. Brittany remained by his side, a perfect, smiling doll. She would occasionally lean in and whisper something in his ear, and he would nod, patting her hand. They were the image of a power couple, a portrait of success. No one looking at them would ever guess at the rot beneath the surface. Genevieve decided to risk another foray into the crowd, needing to feel the energy of the room, to not be a coward hiding behind a plant. She moved along the wall, her path taking her past a knot of women whose husbands were all in Jonathan's orbit. She recognized them from countless brunches and Hampton's weekends. They hadn't seen her yet. Honestly, it's an upgrade in every way. a woman named Diana was saying, swirling her champagne. Brittany is from the Davenport family. It's a much better match pedigree-wise. I heard the first wife was terribly needy. Another added, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. An academic or something. Jonathan needs a partner, not a project. Did you see her here tonight? Diana hissed, a thrill of gossip in her voice. Wearing that navy thing, it's positively funereal. It's like she wants everyone to feel sorry for her. So pathetic. Genevieve froze her back to them. Every word was a poisoned dart. Needy. A project. Pathetic. It was the narrative Jonathan had spun, and they had all bought it hook, line, and sinker. She forced her feet to move to carry her away, before they saw her, before they had the satisfaction of seeing the hurt in her eyes. She found herself by the silent auction tables again, pretending to study a set of pearl earrings. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. It wasn't just that they were insulting her. It was the casual, complete erasure of who she was. Her entire identity had been reduced to the needy first wife. Her degrees, her career, her very essence, all gone. Genevieve. The voice was low and unexpected. She turned to see a man named Philip Colbert, a junior partner at Jonathan's firm. He was young, ambitious, and always seemed to be sweating slightly, as if perpetually nervous. Philip, she said, managing a cool, even tone, I didn't expect to see you here. The whole senior team is here, he said, avoiding her eyes and looking around nervously. Jonathan wanted to make a strong showing for Mr. Cunningham. He took a gulp of his drink. Listen, I wanted to say I was always sorry about how things... You know. It was the first crack in the united front, the first hint of humanity she'd encountered all night. But she knew Philip. He wasn't brave. He was just hedging his bets, offering a sliver of sympathy in the shadows where no one could see him. Thank you, Philip, she said, her voice softer than she intended. He's under a lot of pressure. Philip stammered, as if trying to justify his boss's behavior. The Westbrook deal went south, and if Cunningham doesn't come on board... He stopped himself, realizing he'd said too much. Anyway, good to see you looking well. He scurried away as quickly as he'd appeared, melting back into the crowd. But his words lingered. The Westbrook deal went south. So the rumors were true. Jonathan wasn't just schmoozing. He was desperate. The knowledge didn't bring her the satisfaction she might have expected. It just made the whole spectacle feel even more hollow, more tragic. His entire world was a house of cards, and he was smiling and laughing as if he lived in a fortress. The lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a man walked onto the stage, the museum director. It was time for the evening's main presentation. The speeches, the pledges, the celebration of wealth in the service of art. Genevieve felt a pang of longing for the simple love of art that had brought her here, a love now tainted by the ugly commerce of the evening. She decided she had endured enough. She had come, she had faced the beast, and she had survived. It was time to go home to her quiet apartment, her books, and her own life. She turned to head for the exit, wanting to slip out before the speeches began to disappear as quietly as she had arrived. But as she moved toward the grand arched doorway, another figure entered, moving against the tide of departing assistants and coat check staff. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 70s, with a shock of silver hair and a bearing of absolute authority. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo, but an impeccably tailored conservative charcoal suit that in this room stood out more than any sequin or diamond. His eyes, sharp and intelligent behind gold-rimmed spectacles, scanned the room with a singular purpose. He wasn't taking in the scene. He was looking for someone. He walked past billionaires and senators without giving them a second glance. His gaze swept the room, and for a heart-stopping second it landed directly on Genevieve. And then he started walking straight towards her. Time seemed to slow down. As the silver-haired man approached, a strange bubble of silence formed around Genevieve. The cacophony of the ballroom, the clinking glasses, the forced laughter, the orchestral music faded into a distant hum. She didn't recognize him. He wasn't part of Jonathan's world of finance or the high society circles she had been forced to travel in. There was an old-world gravity to him, a seriousness that felt utterly out of place amidst the evening's frivolity. He moved with an unhurried, deliberate pace. People instinctively parted for him, sensing the invisible aura of importance that surrounded him. A well-known real estate developer started to greet him, hand outstretched, but the man gave a curt, dismissive nod and continued on his path, his eyes never leaving Genevieve. Her mind raced. Who was he? A creditor of Jonathan's? A private investigator? Had she done something wrong? Every insecurity Jonathan had ever instilled in her rose to the surface. She felt a primal urge to flee, to turn and melt into the shadows, but her feet were rooted to the spot, held fast by the intensity of his gaze. He stopped a respectful 2 feet in front of her. His face was lined with the wisdom of age, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Mrs. Genevieve Holloway?" he asked. His voice was a calm, resonant baritone. It was the first time all evening someone had used her proper name with such formal respect. "Yes." She managed her own voice, barely a whisper. "My name is Arthur Abernathy," he said, offering a slight formal bow of his head. "I am the senior partner at Abernathy, Cole & Finch. I apologize for the intrusion." The name of the law firm didn't register, but the name Finch snagged her attention. Windsor & Finch was the name of the auction house where she worked. It was likely a coincidence. New York was full of Finches. "How do you know who I am?" she asked, her confusion overriding her fear. "I was given a very specific description," Mr. Abernathy said, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And I was told to look for the one person in the room who seemed to appreciate the art more than the cocktails." He gave a subtle nod toward a small Monet on the far wall, a piece she had been admiring earlier. His observation was so astute, so specific, that it disarmed her completely. On the main stage, the museum director had finished his opening remarks and was now introducing the evening's guest of honor. No one was paying any attention to the quiet drama unfolding in the corner. "I represent the estate of the late Mr. Alistair Finch," he continued, his voice dropping slightly. Genevieve's mind spun. Alistair Finch. He had been the reclusive, silent partner in her auction house, a mythical figure no one had ever met, who communicated only through his lawyers. He had passed away a few weeks ago. The office had held a moment of silence, and then life had moved on. She had never met him, never even seen a photograph of him. I work for Windsor & Finch," she stammered. "I'm very sorry for your client's passing." "Mr. Finch was aware of your employment," Mr. Abernathy said. "He was aware of a great many things." He paused, his gaze becoming more serious. "Mrs. Holloway, I have been trying to reach you for the past 2 weeks. The letters sent to your apartment were returned, and you have no listed phone number." I don't have a landline," she said, feeling flustered. "The letters, my mailbox lock was broken. I've been meaning to get it fixed." It was a small, pathetic detail, but it was the truth. In the grand scheme of her upended life, a broken mailbox had been low on the priority list. Mr. Abernathy simply nodded, accepting her explanation without judgment. "Circumstances have compelled me to seek you out personally. The reading of Mr. Finch's last will and testament was this morning. Your presence was required." My presence. Why, I didn't know him. A commotion was starting on stage. The auctioneer was preparing to start the live auction, beginning with a week-long stay at a private villa in Tuscany. The crowd's attention was shifting. "Mr. Finch, it seems, knew you," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice firm but gentle. "He followed your academic career for years. He read your master's thesis on post-war provenance. He was the anonymous benefactor who funded the fellowship you won at Columbia. He believed you were one of the few people left in the world with a pure, uncorrupted passion for art and history." Genevieve felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The fellowship, that had been the seed money that allowed her to finish her degree. She had always assumed it came from the university's general fund. The idea that this unknown man had been watching over her, a silent patron in her life, was staggering. "Why?" she breathed. "He had no children of his own," Mr. Abernathy explained. "His family was small and distant. He spent his life building a legacy not of money but of preserved beauty, a vast collection of art and historical artifacts. He needed to leave it to someone who would understand its soul, not just its value. Someone who would be a guardian, not a merchant." From across the room she saw Jonathan place a winning bid on the Tuscany villa, a casual wave of his paddle. He turned to Brittany and kissed her, and the crowd applauded politely. The sight barely registered. Her reality was being completely rewritten in this quiet corner by a man in a charcoal suit. "Mrs. Holloway," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice pulling her back, "there is a matter of some urgency we must discuss, a matter that pertains to the final disposition of Mr. Finch's estate." He looked towards the stage, then back at her. "I believe it might be better to make this official. The chairman of the board is an old friend of mine. Will you permit me a moment on the stage?" Genevieve couldn't speak. She could only nod, a sense of dreamlike unreality washing over her. She watched as Mr. Abernathy made his way toward the stage, a man on a mission, leaving her standing alone in the crowd, the unwitting center of a storm she couldn't yet comprehend. The live auction was in full swing. Jonathan Beaumont, feeling magnanimous after his ostentatious purchase of the Tuscan villa, was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped possessively around Brittany. He had just seen Walter Cunningham give him a nod of approval from across the room. The night was going perfectly. His gambit was working. He was projecting power, wealth, and stability. His comeback was imminent. The auctioneer was trying to whip up excitement for a diamond necklace when he was interrupted. Arthur Abernathy had ascended the small steps to the stage and was speaking quietly but urgently to the museum director and the ball's chairman. The exchange was brief. The chairman, a man who commanded billions with a single phone call, looked at Abernathy, then out into the crowd towards Genevieve, and then back at Abernathy with an expression of stunned disbelief. He nodded slowly and tapped the auctioneer on the shoulder. The auctioneer, flustered by the breach of protocol, cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief unscheduled interlude. Please welcome Mr. Arthur Abernathy, who has an important announcement to make." A murmur went through the crowd. Who was this man in the plain suit? Jonathan shifted in his seat, annoyed by the interruption to his perfectly curated evening. He watched Abernathy step up to the microphone. "Good evening." Abernathy began, his voice amplified through the ballroom, calm and clear as a bell. It commanded immediate silence. "My name is Arthur Abernathy. I am the executor of the estate of the late Mr. Alistair Finch." The name sent a ripple through the room. Alistair Finch was a legend, a ghost in the machine of global finance and art collection. Everyone knew of him, but no one knew him. He was rumored to be one of the museum's largest yet most private benefactors. "As many of you know," Abernathy continued, "Mr. Finch was a devoted but intensely private patron of the arts. His final wish was that his privacy be honored, but he also included a specific codicil in his will to be enacted at this very event, an institution he so dearly loved." Jonathan leaned forward, slightly intrigued despite himself. This was unexpected. Perhaps Finch had left a massive bequest to the museum. Mr. Finch dedicated his life to the careful acquisition and preservation of what is considered one of the most significant private art collections in the world, Abernathy said. His estate also includes controlling interests in Finch Global Corp., extensive real estate holdings, and a diversified portfolio of securities. The disposition of this estate has been his primary concern for the past decade. The air was thick with anticipation. Every banker in the room was mentally calculating the value of such an empire. After a long and meticulous search for a suitable heir, Abernathy's eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto Genevieve, who stood frozen near the back. "Mr. Finch has chosen to bequeath the entirety of his estate without condition to a single individual, a person he believed possessed the integrity, knowledge, and soul to become the custodian of his life's work." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the fizz of champagne bubbles in a nearby glass. "It is my legal duty and my distinct honor to publicly announce the sole beneficiary of the Alistair Finch estate." Abernathy declared, his voice ringing with authority. He raised his hand and pointed directly at the woman in the simple navy dress. "Mrs. Genevieve Holloway." For a full 10 seconds nothing happened. The name just hung in the air, meaningless to most. Then a collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Heads swiveled. 1,000 pairs of eyes searched for the woman who had been named. They found her standing alone, her face pale in the dim light, looking as stunned as they were. Jonathan Beaumont's smile froze on his face. He blinked, certain he had misheard. Genevieve. His Genevieve, impossible. It had to be another Genevieve Holloway. But Abernathy wasn't finished. "The estate," he announced as if delivering a verdict, "which includes the Finch collection, all corporate assets and liquid capital, has a current certified net value in excess of $2.7 billion. The sound that followed was a physical shockwave of noise. Gasps turned into frantic whispers. Champagne glasses clattered. On the stage, the museum director's jaw was slack. $2.7 billion. The number echoed in the cavernous space, an impossible, life-altering figure. Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face. His vision tunneled until the only thing he could see was Genevieve standing there as a spotlight of 1,000 stares descended upon her. The woman he had mocked. The woman he had discarded. The project. The needy wife. The woman he had publicly humiliated not 30 minutes ago. Brittany beside him was sputtering. "What, who? Her, it's a joke, right? Jonathan, tell me it's a joke." But it wasn't a joke. The look on Arthur Abernathy's face was one of grim finality. He stepped away from the microphone and began to descend the stairs, making his way back towards Genevieve, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. The ghost at the feast had just become the queen. And the king, Jonathan Beaumont, felt his throne turn to dust beneath him. The aftermath of the announcement was chaos. The carefully constructed artifice of the gala shattered into a million pieces. The polite murmur was replaced by a roar of excited, incredulous chatter. Cell phones emerged from glittering purses, their screens lighting up faces as people frantically Googled Alistair Finch and Genevieve Holloway. The press photographers, who had been lazily snapping pictures of socialites, suddenly surged forward, their flashes firing like a strobe light, all aimed at the still frozen figure in navy silk. Genevieve felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were floating above her own body, watching the scene unfold. $2.7 billion. The number was abstract, nonsensical. It didn't feel real. More real was the sudden, suffocating press of people. Mrs. Lancaster, the woman who had cut her dead earlier, was suddenly at her elbow, her face a mask of fawning concern. "Genevieve, my dear, I had no idea. How absolutely marvelous. We must have lunch. You simply must tell me everything." Gregory Finch, the snobbish acquisitions director, pushed his way through, his wife trailing behind him. "Mrs. Holloway," he boomed, his voice oozing a sycophancy that was nauseating. "A true connoisseur has been recognized. I speak for the entire museum when I say how thrilled we are to have such a discerning custodian for the Finch legacy." People she hadn't spoken to in years were surrounding her, touching her arm, thrusting business cards into her hands. They were all talking at once, their voices a meaningless torrent of congratulations and invitations. They didn't see her. They saw the number. They saw the power. Through a gap in the crowd she saw Jonathan. He was on his feet, his face a ghastly shade of white. His carefully maintained mask of control had crumbled, replaced by a raw, naked expression of utter disbelief and something else. Panic. He started pushing his way toward her, his movements clumsy and desperate. Genevieve," he called out, his voice strained. But before he could reach her, Mr. Abernathy was there, flanking her like a Secret Service agent. 2 other men, clearly security, materialized out of nowhere and formed a quiet but impenetrable barrier. "I think Mrs. Holloway has had enough excitement for one evening," Mr. Abernathy said calmly to the clamoring crowd. Jonathan finally broke through the inner circle of sycophants, his eyes wild. He stared at Genevieve, and in that moment she saw the full arc of their lives together in his expression, the initial flicker of greed, the swift calculation of what her new status meant for him, and the dawning, sickening horror of what he had thrown away. "Jen, we need to talk," he pleaded, his voice hoarse. This is incredible. I don't understand." Brittany was right behind him, her beautiful face twisted in a mask of rage and jealousy. "What did you do?" she hissed at Genevieve, her voice low and venomous. "Who did you sleep with to get that?" The crassness of the accusation was so shocking it snapped Genevieve out of her stupor. A cold, clear anger cut through her confusion. She looked at Brittany, then at the desperate, pathetic man she used to love. She really saw them for the first time, small, grasping people terrified of losing their place in a world built on illusion. She looked Jonathan dead in the eye. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "There's nothing to talk about, Jonathan," she said, her voice steady and clear. "You and I have said everything that needs to be said." His face crumpled. "But our history, what we had, she said the words sharp and precise, "was an arrangement that suited you. The arrangement is over." The finality in her tone struck him silent. He looked around, seeing the faces of his peers, his potential investors, all watching this public implosion. He saw Walter Cunningham, the man he had been courting all night, staring at him with a look of cold pity and reassessment. In a single moment, Jonathan Beaumont had gone from predator to prey. His financial desperation, which he had so carefully concealed, was now laid bare in the context of his ex-wife's astronomical good fortune. Who would invest in a man who had fumbled an alliance with a billionaire? His Beaumont brand was now a laughingstock. Mr. Abernathy leaned in towards Genevieve. "There is a car waiting for you at the side entrance, Mrs. Holloway, whenever you are ready." Ready. She was more than ready. She gave a final sweeping glance at the room full of shocked faces, at the man whose world she had just inadvertently destroyed, and at the life she was leaving behind forever. She felt no triumph, no desire for revenge, only a profound, quiet sense of release. She turned her back on Jonathan Beaumont without another word and let Mr. Abernathy guide her through the parting sea of people towards the door and her new, unimaginable future. Following Mr. Abernathy was like walking in the wake of a ship. The crowd parted their whispers, following her like a rustle of leaves. The flashes of cameras were relentless, but she kept her eyes fixed straight ahead on the ornate double doors that promised escape. As they reached the relative quiet of the marble-floored lobby, the museum director hurried to catch up with them. "Mrs. Holloway, Genevieve, on behalf of the entire board, please accept my profound congratulations. Alistair was a dear, if distant, friend. He chose well. If there is anything at all the museum can do for you, you have only to ask." The man who an hour ago wouldn't have recognized her was now offering her the keys to the kingdom. Genevieve paused, turning to face him. The shock was receding, replaced by a nascent sense of clarity and purpose. She thought of Alistair Finch, the mysterious man who had seen her when no one else had. He hadn't just given her money. He had given her a responsibility, a legacy. "Thank you, Director," she said, her voice resonating with a newfound confidence she didn't know she possessed. Mr. Finch was a passionate believer in making art accessible. In honor of his memory and to begin my stewardship of his legacy, I would like to pledge a donation from the estate of $50 million to the museum's educational and outreach programs. The director's jaw dropped. $50 million. It was a staggering sum, one of the largest single donations in the museum's history. Furthermore, Genevieve continued, her voice gaining strength, I will be personally overseeing the creation of the Alistair Finch Fellowship for Provenance Research to support young academics in the field, the very field Mr. Finch supported for me. She glanced briefly at Dr. Peterson, who was standing nearby looking at her with tears of pride welling in his eyes. It was a masterstroke. In less than a minute, she had transformed herself from a stunned heiress into a formidable philanthropist. She wasn't just a recipient of fortune, she was a wielder of it. She had seized control of her own narrative, defining herself by her actions, not by the shock of her inheritance. Mr. Abernathy allowed himself a small, proud smile. "The car is just outside Mrs. Holloway." They stepped out of the museum's side entrance into the cool night air. The chaos of the gala was a distant noise. Waiting at the curb was not a taxi, but a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom, its engine humming silently. A uniformed driver held the door open for her. Before she got in, she heard one last desperate cry. "Jen!" It was Jonathan. He had somehow slipped past the security and run out after her. He stood on the sidewalk, his tuxedo rumpled, his face etched with desperation. The powerful, confident man was gone, replaced by a ghost of his own making. "Please, Jen, don't do this," he begged, taking a step towards her. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." Genevieve looked at him, the man who had systematically dismantled her self-worth, who had cast her aside for a younger, wealthier model, now begging for scraps from her table. There was no anger left. There was no hatred. There was only a vast empty space where her love for him used to be. "Goodbye, Jonathan," she said, her voice soft but final. She slid into the plush leather interior of the Rolls-Royce. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing out the sounds of her old life. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked through the tinted window. Jonathan stood on the sidewalk, a solitary, shrinking figure under the glow of a street lamp, watching his past, his future, and his last chance at redemption drive away into the New York night. Genevieve Holloway did not look back. She was facing forward towards a dawn that was entirely her own. The silence inside the Rolls-Royce was profound. It was a dense, heavy quiet insulated from the city's symphony of sirens and horns. The streetlights of Manhattan slid across the polished wood interior, casting fleeting glows on Genevieve's hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. Outside the tinted windows, the world she knew, the world of walk-up apartments, crowded subways, and careful budgets, rushed by, already feeling like a distant country. For several minutes neither she nor Mr. Abernathy spoke. Genevieve stared unseeingly at the passing city, her mind a whirlwind of numbers and emotions. $2.7 billion. $50 million. The words echoed, but the reality behind them remained elusive, like a dream she couldn't quite grasp. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation with Jonathan and the impromptu press conference was beginning to fade, leaving a tremor in its wake. "Are you all right, Mrs. Holloway?" Mr. Abernathy asked, his voice gentle, cutting through her reverie. Genevieve turned to look at the kind, serious man beside her. "I'm not sure what I am," she answered honestly, her voice a little shaky. "It doesn't feel real. I keep expecting to wake up." "I assure you this is very real," he said with a small, reassuring smile. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax, bearing the imprint of a stylized F. "Mr. Finch anticipated you might feel this way. He instructed me to give this to you on the evening you were informed of your inheritance. He wanted you to hear it from him in his own words." Genevieve took the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. Her name, Genevieve Holloway, was written across the front in a strong, elegant script. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of stationery. "My dear Mrs. Holloway," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then my long search is over and my life's work is in your hands. Forgive the dramatic nature of this introduction. I have always been a private man, and I felt it was better to let my legacy speak for me. For years I have followed your work. I read your paper on the restitution of stolen art after World War II, and was struck not by its academic brilliance alone, but by its moral clarity. In a world that sees art as a commodity, you see it as a piece of the human soul, a testament to history that must be honored. When your husband, your ex-husband now I trust, began acquiring his collection. I watched as you guided him with a purity of taste he could never comprehend. He bought names, you found beauty. I have no family to whom I could entrust my collection. They see only the price tags. I needed a guardian, not an heir. Someone who understands that the value of a thing is not what it costs, but the story it tells. I did not give you this fortune to make you rich, Mrs. Holloway, although you are now exceedingly so. I gave it to you to empower you to do what you were always meant to do, to protect, to preserve, and to champion our shared history. The money is merely a tool to that end. It is a shield and a sword. Use it to defend beauty from the cynics and the merchants. Do not be intimidated by the scale of it. Trust your instincts. They are the finest I have ever encountered. Welcome to your new life. Do good work. It was signed simply, Alistair Finch. Tears welled in Genevieve's eyes as she finished reading. They were not tears of shock or sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming sense of being seen. After years of being diminished and dismissed, of having her passion treated as a frivolous hobby, this man she had never met had understood the very core of who she was. The inheritance was not a lottery ticket. It was a calling. He was a remarkable man, Mr. Abernathy said quietly, having given her the space to read. I wish I could have met him, she whispered, folding the letter carefully and clutching it to her chest. To thank him. In a way you will, the lawyer replied. You will meet him in every painting in the collection and every decision the Foundation makes. The car was slowing now, turning onto Fifth Avenue. It pulled to a stop before one of the most prestigious pre-war buildings on the block, a grand limestone edifice with a green canopy and a doorman in full livery. Where are we? Genevieve asked, her voice filled with confusion. Her own apartment was dozens of blocks uptown and a world away in status. This was Mr. Finch's primary residence, Mr. Abernathy explained as the driver came around to open her door. It is now yours. We took the liberty of having your personal effects from your apartment discreetly moved here this afternoon. We felt you would not wish to return there. The thought of her small, worn-out apartment with its broken mailbox and leaky faucet felt like a lifetime ago. Stepping out of the car, she looked up at the towering building. The doorman, a distinguished man with graying temples, stepped forward and tipped his hat. Good evening, Mrs. Holloway, he said, his tone one of quiet, respectful welcome. We have been expecting you. Welcome home. Mr. Abernathy gestured toward the ornate lobby doors. This is your new beginning, Genevieve. Taking a deep breath, clutching the letter from Alistair Finch like a talisman, Genevieve walked through the doors. She was no longer a ghost at the feast. She was the mistress of a new house, the steward of an incredible legacy, and for the first time in a very long time, the author of her own story. The weight of it all was immense, but for the first time she felt strong enough to carry it. And so, Genevieve's story isn't just about going from rags to riches. It's a powerful testament to the quiet strength that resides in all of us, even when the world tries to convince us we are invisible. It's a story about a woman who was stripped of everything but her own integrity and intellect, and how those qualities proved to be the most valuable assets of all. Her vindication wasn't just in the money. It was in the moment she reclaimed her own voice, proving that true power isn't about who you know or what you own, but about who you are when no one is watching. Her journey reminds us that sometimes the greatest comebacks are born from the deepest betrayals, and that your true worth is never determined by those who choose to underestimate you. If Genevieve's incredible story of resilience and ultimate triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life stories that will inspire and amaze you. Thank you for listening.